Alright, so here I have just a cube and a plane. I have nothing changed to my world environment from the defaults. I have a directional light over here, which is pointing in this direction and creating a shadow here. I like to focus on directional lights for stuff, but most of the same stuff applies to omnilights. But in any case, I'm just going to turn this omnilight off. You can see that there is still the bias option, a contact option, as well as, the shadow mode primarily. Dual paraboloid versus cube. This will come in handy later, but focusing just on directional light, where this is probably the easiest to test out. So you've definitely messed around with bias before, where like increasing it too much increases this gap between the object and the shadow. You can turn on contact to try and fix this, although it's heavy on performance. I don't like it. There's also, decreasing the bias too much. If we get it just right, you can see this banding happens just from pushing the bias too far. And if I set it to like a too high of a value, let's say 3, and I go back to the directional light and try to change its angle at some point, just from virtue of the bias being set so aggressively, you can still get this kind of banding effect on shadows, even though it doesn't seem like it's an atrocious angle, but it's just the bias is not tuned to the angle of the light. So just changing it a little bit already fixed that banding. But if we go back to this, there's a few ways you can fix banding like this. One of the ways is to go to shadow mode, shadow filter mode in render quality for your project settings. By default, it's at PCF5, and if you turn it to disabled or up the filtering, the banding can look a little bit different. I think I can get an example here where it's just barely noticeable. Over here at 3.02, PCF13, if I disable it, okay. Sometimes you can get it so that if you have maybe like a really low bias and you change your directional light angle in such a way that, creates this sort of banding effect everywhere, you can mess with the shadow filtering and sometimes it will hide it. There's also the different modes for displaying shadows. Orthogonal definitely seems to create the most amount of issues if you're not careful. See, if I turn up my bias to like 3.15, I get all these different shadowing artifacts. I can change my shadow filtering mode and it's hidden a little bit more. Sometimes you get lucky and changing it either the mode of the shadow generation, like see the PSSM average totally gets rid of all of these banding artifacts, whereas orthogonal does not. You can, of course, still reintroduce it with one of the modes, but it depends what you're using and what shadow filter settings you have on. You can also increase the shadow atlas size. That requires an editor restart, so I'm not going to show it, but there's the directional shadow one over here. If I did this, then it would make it look a lot blotchier. I think you can actually increase this amount to hide some of these, but it totally depends how well the shadows and lighting is already performing on your game and your target platform and all that stuff. The Shadow Atlas stuff over here is for your omnilights and your spotlights. So if I went to, say, an omnilight, and if I made an environment that had nothing in it, so let's try it over here. Say if I've got a range of 20, and I'm just going to really exaggerate it. Okay. And turning on shadow. This may not work as well as I hope to. Okay, I am going to put in a directional light. but I'm going to make sure that the energy is small enough so you can still tell that there's a, yeah, there we go, okay. So here we've got this going on. I can switch the way that the shadow is rendered. You get like these kind of jaggies. This is where increasing the shadow atlas size will help a lot, because right now it's handling stuff per pixel on the shadow atlas texture. And changing it to horizontal or vertical, like, matters a lot. Obviously, all these different settings you've probably played around with before. I haven't been able to see, here we are. I mean, I've only seen this in like incredibly extreme cases where the bias is just negative. Negative bias is basically never a good option, in my opinion. It's just always so much more worth it to have a higher bias than you need. Obviously, if you increase it too much, it's gonna go a bit berserk over here. But for the most part, yeah, I was just a bit interested to see that you're getting the self-shadowing stuff here, which is what this is, on objects using an omnilight. But if your focus is trying to close this gap and you want the negative bias to really ensure that, there's not a whole lot of situations where that would happen. If you really need the accuracy, use baked light maps instead, and really only dedicate an omnilight to, say, like moving objects. The directional light I like to keep in just because I can. Then it's an easy way to light everything without having to constantly rebake it. But for indoor stuff, absolutely, I feel like baked lighting is a lot more appropriate. You'd have to look at some tutorials for that much, but hopefully this has been some sort of insight to my best ideas of how to handle like a self-shadowing or banding and all that kind of fun stuff. Yeah, hopefully this was helpful. Please let me know if there's any other like questions or thoughts you have about the situation you're in right now.